Black CEO watches his check shredded, then transfers the bank's ownership in silence. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Fake check. The words cut through the marble lobby like a blade. Laughter followed sharp, echoing, cruel. The bank manager, silver hair slicked back, threw his head back as the shredder roared to life beside him. Strips of white paper spiraled out like confetti of humiliation. Behind him, the brushed brass letters read, Meridian Community Bank. Across the counter stood David Cole, black t-shirt, quiet eyes, hands at his sides calm, but carved from steel. He didn't blink as the machine devoured the check he had just handed over. Did you really think this would work? The manager scoffed. A security guard stepped forward, gripping David's arm too tight, too proud. Phones lifted around the lobby. A woman whispered, "Is he serious?" Another murmured, "He's recording this, right?" The manager leaned in, voice dripping with arrogance. "You people print anything online these days. Next time, try color ink." Laughter again. David didn't move. Only his jaw shifted, slow and deliberate. The shredder clicked off. Silence landed heavy. You could hear the hum of the AC, the shuffle of shoes, the uneasy breath of witnesses. "Sir," the guard said, "you need to step away." David looked at him, calm as gravity. "You sure about that?" The guard hesitated just for a second, then tightened his grip anyway. The manager smirked. "Security first, dignity later." Aye. He reached into the bin, held up a handful of shredded paper, and let it rain to the floor. "That's what fake money looks like." David finally spoke, voice low but clear. "That's what arrogance sounds like." A ripple moved through the room, a soundless question in every face. Who is this man? Why isn't he shouting? Why does it feel like he's still in control? The manager turned to leave, proud of his performance. David's phone buzzed once in his pocket. A quiet vibration, nothing dramatic. He didn't check it yet. He just looked at the shredder, then at the logo on the wall. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to David. Because this wasn't just a fake check. It was a test. And in 7 minutes, the man who got laughed at would own this building. The room didn't breathe. For a second, it was as if time paused right after the shredder stopped screaming. David didn't move. His wrist was still in the guard's grip, veins tightening under calm skin. Across the counter, the manager adjusted his tie, pleased with himself, feeding off the silent humiliation. "Next time, bring real money," he said, half laughing. No one laughed back. A young teller at the side desk, Ava Morales, glanced up from her monitor. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, unsure whether to keep working or to say something that could cost her job. She had seen the name on that check. It wasn't fake. It was drawn directly from Cole Capital Group. She knew that name from internal memos, something about a merger. But she stayed quiet. For now, David slowly pulled his arm free from the guard's hand. The man didn't resist, not after seeing the way the crowd's attention had shifted. "Are we done here?" David asked, voice low, steady. The manager crossed his arms. "We'll keep this for investigation. If it's real, which it isn't, you'll hear from legal." He turned to a nearby clerk. "Call compliance. Tell them we've stopped a fraud attempt." Phones came up again. Someone whispered, "He's too calm for a scammer." Another voice answered, "Yeah, that's what makes it scary." David's eyes drifted toward the office door behind the counter, the one marked authorized personnel only. He looked back at the manager. "What's your name?" The man smirked. "Doesn't matter." David nodded once. "It will." Ava's stomach dropped. She typed a quick message into the internal chat. "A check from Cole Capital was destroyed. Should we escalate?" No reply, just a blinking cursor. The manager's laughter returned, forced this time. "All right, folks, show's over. Back to your business." But no one moved. The quiet had weight now, pressing against the walls, crawling up the glass. David turned away from the counter, his phone still in his hand. The lock screen pulsed once with a notification. Cole Capital Ownership Transfer. Phase 1 confirmed. He slid the phone back into his pocket without reaction. The guard shifted uncomfortably, glancing between the shredded pile and the man who didn't seem humiliated at all. "Sir," he muttered, "do you need help filing a complaint?" David looked at him calm, almost kind. "No, I'm already handling it." He walked toward the exit. Every step sounded heavier than it should. Ava watched him leave, then looked at the pile of shredded paper spilling over the desk like snow. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "That wasn't a scam. That was a storm." Outside the glass doors, sunlight hit David's face. He reached for his earpiece and said quietly, "Phase 2. A voice answered instantly, crisp, professional. "Confirmed, Mr. Cole. Initiating bank-level access lockdown." Inside, the manager laughed again until the lights flickered. Every terminal screen in the branch went black. The first flicker lasted less than a second, just long enough to draw a gasp. Then it happened again. Monitors blinked, printers coughed, the fluorescent lights overhead dimmed to an eerie pulse. "What's going on?" the manager barked, glancing toward the IT desk. A clerk stammered, "Systems. Just disconnected from the network, sir." "Then reconnect," he snapped. But the screen in front of him now displayed a single line of text in white over black. "Transfer protocol active. Ownership verification in progress." The room went still. Ava froze mid-type, eyes wide. She recognized the phrasing. It was corporate system language, not local. Only the parent company could trigger it. And there was only one new parent company, Cole Capital Group. The manager's face lost a shade of confidence. "That's impossible. That process can't run without board approval." From behind, a customer laughed quietly. Maybe the board already approved it. The laughter rippled through the crowd, soft but dangerous. David hadn't left the block yet. Through the glass wall, he stood outside, phone still in hand, looking back in. He wasn't smiling. He didn't need to. Ava's headset crackled suddenly, an internal call. She tapped it. "Hello?" A calm voice replied, "This is corporate audit. Confirm location. Meridian Community Bank, downtown branch?" "Yes." "Then please note, your manager's credentials are being revoked. Security clearance rollback begins now." She pulled off the headset, heart pounding. The manager's access badge on his belt lit red. He swiped it once on the back office door, denied. Tried again, denied. "What the hell?" he muttered. "Restart the system." No one moved. The guard stepped closer, voice careful. "Sir, maybe you should call headquarters." The manager glared at him, jaw tight. "I am headquarters." But Ava's whisper sliced through the tension. "Not anymore." He turned to her sharply. "What did you say?" Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. "You just shredded the check of our new owner." A collective inhale filled the lobby, a human wave of disbelief. Phones came up again, recording. Somewhere in the back, a customer said, "This is going online." The manager's hand shook as he reached for the landline. It didn't dial. Dead tone. Outside, David finally began to walk back toward the doors, slow, unhurried. The guard stepped back automatically, as if gravity itself was rearranging the room. The automatic doors opened with a hiss. David crossed the threshold, sunlight behind him, his voice quiet but sharp enough to split the air. "Let's finish this." Ava whispered, "He's coming back." And the manager, once loud, once certain, stood frozen behind his counter, surrounded by flickering lights and 30 silent witnesses who had just learned what power really looked like. The moment David stepped back inside, the atmosphere shifted again. The air, once thick with arrogance, now trembled with confusion. No one spoke. Even the hum of the HVAC seemed to pause. The guard who had gripped David's wrist earlier straightened instinctively, then stepped aside. "Sir, welcome back," he said under his breath. David didn't answer. He walked past him, his footsteps slow and deliberate against the marble floor. At the counter, the manager forced out a nervous chuckle. "Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but you can't just—" He stopped mid-sentence. Behind David, the wall-mounted screen flickered to life. The Meridian Bank logo vanished, replaced by a simple white emblem, Cole Capital Group. Every computer in the lobby pinged at once. A corporate message flashed. "New executive access enabled. All staff, stand by for leadership update." Ava gasped. "That's a full system override," she whispered. "It's live." The manager turned pale. "Who authorized this?" David approached the counter, calm as ever. "You did," he said softly. When you shredded that check. The words landed like a verdict. The crowd stirred. Phones rose higher. The manager's voice cracked. You're bluffing! David slid his phone onto the counter. Its screen glowed with an open dashboard, financial systems, branch data, and a live video feed of the boardroom 12 stories above. 3 executives sat there watching silently. One of them nodded toward the camera. This is David Cole, said the woman in the center, voice calm and amplified through the bank's intercom. Effective this morning, he assumes majority ownership of Meridian Community Bank. Compliance has been notified. Local management, please cooperate. Gasps erupted. The manager stepped back like the floor had tilted under him. No one told me. You weren't listening, David interrupted. His tone wasn't cruel, just final. That's been your problem all morning. Ava stared at him, awe replacing fear. The young clerk at the end of the row muttered, holy hell, he really owns it. David looked around the room. Keep your phones rolling, he said quietly. Transparency helps everyone learn faster. The manager's face reddened. You came here to humiliate me? David shook his head. No, I came here to see how you treat strangers. You gave me the answer. A murmur rippled through the bystanders' agreement. Disbelief. Vindication. The guard lowered his gaze. Ava straightened her back. The room wasn't his anymore. It belonged to the truth now. David reached across the counter, not to threaten, but to lift a strip of shredded paper. He let it fall between them like snow. This, he said quietly, was a transaction. You cashed in your respect for arrogance, and the system just paid you back in kind. The intercom chimed again. Executive review begins in 5 minutes. Please remain on site for reassignment or termination notice. David stepped aside, giving the manager one last look, not angry, not gloating, just done. Then he turned toward Ava. You saw what happened. You did the right thing by staying calm. That matters. Ava nodded slowly, whispering, Thank you, sir. David smiled faintly, then looked toward the security guard. Unlock the conference room, he said. It's time to finish this properly. The guard obeyed. And as the heavy glass doors swung open, every person in that lobby knew the quiet man they'd mocked had just taken back the entire building. The glass doors closed behind them with a low hiss, sealing off the noise of the lobby. Inside, the conference room felt colder walls of polished steel and glass, a long table gleaming under fluorescent light. The kind of room built for power. David didn't sit. He stayed standing at the head of the table, one hand resting on the chair that used to belong to the regional manager. His reflection in the glass wall looked taller than before, steadier. Ava entered last, hesitant but curious, holding a tablet she'd grabbed from her desk. The guard stood by the door, unsure whether to leave or salute. At the other end of the table, the bank manager stumbled in, escorted by 2 compliance officers who'd arrived minutes earlier. His confidence was gone. His face was a pale echo of the man who'd shredded the check. Mr. Cole, one officer said, transition protocols have been confirmed. Corporate ownership is officially logged under your name. David nodded once. Good. Let's keep this simple. He turned to the manager. Do you know why I came here in person? The man tried to recover some authority. You wanted attention. No, David said quietly. I wanted truth. He walked slowly along the table, his footsteps soft but precise. See, when we acquire a bank, we audit the culture. The numbers always tell part of the story. The people tell the rest. He stopped beside the manager. You just told me everything I needed to know. The man swallowed hard. I made a mistake. David looked him in the eye. You made several, but let's start with the one you can fix. He pointed toward the wall monitor. It showed a freeze frame from the security feed the moment the check went into the shredder. The manager's face mid-laugh. David said, You're going to record an apology. Not for me. For everyone who watched you that day and thought they had to accept disrespect to keep their job. The manager blinked, stunned. You want me to? Yes. Because humiliation shouldn't be silent. He handed him a mic. The man hesitated, looked down at the device, then around the room, Ava, the officers, the guard, all watching. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled. I disrespected a client based on appearance. I failed my role. I'm sorry, David nodded, accepting the apology with neither smile nor satisfaction. Accountability, he said softly. It's a better investment than pride. Ava couldn't stop staring. This wasn't revenge, it was reform in real time. The intercom buzzed. A voice from corporate HQ came through. Mr. Cole, external media has begun circulating footage from the lobby. Would you like a public statement drafted? David thought for a moment, then said, "No press. Let the footage speak for itself." He looked back at the group. Silence got us here, but silence, used right, can also restore balance. He turned to Ava. You'll act as interim branch director until a new structure is set. Report to me directly. Her eyes widened. Sir, I thank you. David smiled slightly. Earn it. As he walked toward the door, the guard stepped aside again, almost in salute. The manager lowered his head, and for the first time that morning, the building felt quiet for the right reasons. By noon, the story had already escaped the building. Clips from cell phones, shaky and raw, flooded social media. A bank manager laughing, a check shredded, a calm black man walking out before the lights flickered. One caption read, "He didn't shout, he just owned the bank." Within hours, millions had watched it. Inside Meridian's downtown branch, the mood had shifted from chaos to awe. The lobby was silent again, but not from fear, from realization. Every employee was working, but slower, gentler, like the air itself had changed. Ava stood by the large glass wall overlooking the city. The skyline glimmered in afternoon light, but she could still see her reflection and David's faint silhouette behind her. He entered without announcement, his presence grounding the room. "How are they?" he asked. "Shaken," Ava said, "but different, like they finally see the place they work for." He nodded. "Good. Growth doesn't start with comfort." He walked to the counter where the shredder still sat unplugged. The fragments of his check had been gathered into a clear evidence bag. He lifted it, studying the pieces. "You know," he said, "I could reprint that check in 5 seconds. But this," he held it up, "this is more valuable, a reminder." Ava smiled faintly. "That you don't need noise to make change?" David met her eyes. "Exactly." The security guard approached, hat in hand. "Sir, I just wanted to say, I shouldn't have grabbed you like that. I was following orders." David shook his hand firmly. "You followed the wrong voice. Just make sure next time it's your own." The guard nodded, humbled. "Yes, sir." Across the lobby, the manager was packing a box under the quiet supervision of compliance staff. No shouting, no drama, just resignation and the faint echo of consequences. For the first time, his expensive watch looked like a weight. David turned toward the exit. "Ava," he said, "when you take over, remember power isn't about being loud, it's about being clear." "I will," she said, almost whispering. Outside, the afternoon heat shimmered over the pavement. Reporters waited across the street, shouting questions. "Mr. Cole, is it true you now control Meridian Bank? Will you press charges?" David paused at the door, adjusting his cuff. "No charges," he said calmly, "just changes." Cameras flashed, catching his steady gaze as he walked toward his car. Behind him, the automatic doors closed, reflecting the words newly etched onto the lobby's digital display. "Leadership means never having to raise your voice." In that moment, even the city seemed to listen. The man who'd been humiliated for a check had rewritten what respect looked like, not with fury, but with silence sharpened into justice. By the next morning, the footage had gone global. CNN called it the silent takeover. Commentators dissected every frame, the manager's smirk, the shredder's hum, David's expression that never changed. Talk shows replayed it like a parable. Power without noise, dignity without spectacle. In boardrooms across the country, executives whispered, "Did you see that video?" For once, a black man in a simple shirt wasn't a headline for anger, he was a headline for control. Inside Coal Capital's headquarters, the view stretched across downtown like a mirror of what had changed. David sat at the long oak table, surrounded by his leadership team. Ava, freshly dressed in a navy suit, stood to his right. Her posture was still cautious but firmer than before. A legal advisor spoke first. "Mr. Cole, public opinion's in your favor, but the bank's PR department wants to release an official apology." David leaned back. "No need. The video already did the talking." The advisor nodded. "Still, would you like to clarify your position?" David's gaze drifted toward the skyline. "They can say what they want. I'm not here to win arguments. I'm here to set standards." Ava watched him carefully. There was no pride in his tone, only purpose. He turned to her. "How's the branch?" "Quiet," she said, "but in a good way. The staff's been introspective. They're even greeting customers differently." "Good." David replied. That means they're starting to understand what culture means. It's not a policy. It's a reflection. His assistant entered, handing him a folder marked Federal Review Notice. Already? David asked. Yes, sir. Treasury wants a meeting. They're impressed by how you handled it. They called it restorative leadership. David allowed himself a small smile. That's just decency with better PR. Ava laughed under her breath, then grew quiet again. Sir, can I ask something? He nodded. When he shredded that check, you didn't even flinch. How did you stay so calm? David's eyes softened. Because he thought he was destroying proof of value. But I knew value doesn't live on paper. It lives in how you respond. The room went still. Everyone there had seen the clip a dozen times, but hearing him say it without ego, without rehearsal, turned the story into something more than viral. It became doctrine. David stood, gathering his notes. We're not done, he said. Meridian isn't just a bank anymore. It's a test case. Every new branch we acquire will train on that footage not to mock, but to learn what silence can do. He paused at the doorway. Arrogance thinks power needs volume, he said quietly, but true power speaks in whispers. The team watched him leave, the door closing with a soft click that echoed louder than any applause. And somewhere, in a dozen comment sections across the world, strangers were writing the same words under his video. He never raised his voice, and still, everyone listened. 2 days later, the invitation arrived. U.S. Treasury Department Leadership Summit on Ethical Banking. David barely reacted. He simply folded the letter, slipped it into his briefcase, and said to Ava, "Book a flight for tomorrow. 1 seat. You'll come." The next morning, Washington, D.C., was dressed in glass and tension. Black cars lined the circular drive of the federal building, cameras flashing at every arrival. Inside, the hall smelled of paper, marble, and politics. David and Ava walked side by side, understated in their simplicity. No entourage, no noise, just presence. As they entered the conference room, heads turned. Some recognized him from the viral video. Others whispered, "That's the guy who froze his own bank." A Treasury official stepped forward, stiff smile in place. "Mr. Cole, we appreciate your discretion. That incident raised difficult but important questions." David nodded once. "That's what banks are for, raising value from difficulty." The official blinked, unsure whether he'd just been quoted. They took their seats. Around the table sat other CEOs, polished, gray-haired, some smirking in polite condescension, the kind of men who thought silence was weakness until they'd watched his 7-minute storm. The moderator began. "Mr. Cole, your actions at Meridian Bank have become a national conversation. Some call it restraint, others call it retaliation. What do you call it?" David met every pair of eyes in the room before answering. "Correction." The word landed clean, sharp. He continued, "When a system fails, it needs correction, not chaos. When people lose sight of respect, they need a mirror, not a lecture. That day, the mirror was me." A few murmurs rippled around the table. One executive leaned back, arms crossed. "With respect, Mr. Cole, not every leader could handle that kind of provocation calmly." David looked at him. Then maybe not every leader should lead. Ava sat still, watching the shift, the unspoken current moving through the room. The moderator smiled thinly. "So, you're saying silence is your strategy?" David shook his head. "Silence isn't strategy, it's clarity. You can't hear what's wrong if you're too busy shouting." Someone at the end of the table clapped once, slow, deliberate. Then another joined. The sound grew, not applause, but acknowledgement. When it faded, the Treasury official leaned forward. "Mr. Cole, the department would like to partner with your firm to develop leadership ethics programs for financial institutions nationwide. Are you open to that?" David exchanged a glance with Ava. "We're not here to profit," he said softly. "We're here to remind people that integrity pays interest." The meeting ended without fanfare. As they stepped back into the sunlight, reporters swarmed. A journalist called out, "Mr. Cole, any message for young leaders watching you right now?" David paused, hand on his car door. "Yeah," he said. "Never mistake volume for strength. The world's loud enough already." Oh, the cameras clicked, and the man who once watched his check shredded climbed into the car while the system that once mocked him began learning from his silence. A week later, back in Atlanta, the reflection of David Cole's face glowed faintly in the darkened windows of Cole Capital's headquarters. The building had become a beacon not because of money, but because of what it now represented: quiet accountability. Across the city, news screens replayed clips from his treasury appearance. The soundbite had gone viral again. Silence isn't strategy, it's clarity. Some used it in leadership workshops. Others mocked it on podcasts. But every time it played, the same reaction followed a moment of thought before the next noise began. Inside his office, David stood at the window, hands in his pockets, watching the rain stripe down the glass. Ava entered quietly, holding a folder. "Sir, you should see this," she said. He turned. "What is it?" She handed him a printed email. "It's from the Meridian staff." They wrote a statement together. David scanned the first lines. It wasn't polished. It wasn't PR. It was raw gratitude. "We learned more from one moment of silence than years of memos. We understand now that a mistake doesn't define you, denial does." He set the paper down slowly. "They're learning faster than the system expected." Ava smiled. "They're learning from the right teacher." He looked at her, then shook his head slightly. "No, from the right lesson." There was a pause, that heavy, respectful quiet that always followed his words. Then Ava's phone buzzed. "Sir," she said, glancing at the screen, "you've been invited to keynote the Global Leadership Forum next month, Geneva." David exhaled softly. "Another microphone. They want you to speak about the incident. Then we'll talk about something bigger," he said. "The incident was never the point." Ava tilted her head. "What was?" David turned back to the rain, the reflection it forced everyone to see. That's the real power, when people stop looking at you and start looking at themselves. Outside, lightning flashed across the skyline, silent, bright, momentary. He watched it fade. "Ava, prepare a message to the team. Tell them we'll host an internal seminar before Geneva. Title it The Mirror Effect." She nodded. "And what should we teach?" He smiled faintly. That integrity, when quiet, still makes noise. The next morning, social media filled with photos from Meridian's lobby employees smiling, greeting customers, and under the new sign on the wall, "Respect is not a courtesy, it's the currency." The clip from Washington had finally slowed online, but the ripples hadn't stopped. An anonymous comment under one repost read, "He made every loud man in the room look small without saying a word." David read it later that night and closed his laptop. The light dimmed. Outside, the city pulsed bright, restless, alive, and somewhere beneath that constant noise, silence was winning. The morning air in Geneva carried that calm precision only Switzerland could manufacture, clean, still, expectant. Flags from 40 nations fluttered outside the glass facade of the Global Leadership Forum. Inside, every seat in the main hall was taken. Rows of journalists, CEOs, and government officials filled the space like an audience waiting for a storm they didn't yet understand. David Cole stepped onto the stage wearing the same black shirt from the viral video. No tie, no script, just a single note card in his hand. Ava stood off stage, headset on, eyes locked on him like a proud witness. The moderator introduced him as the man who changed banking culture with silence. Applause thundered, cameras flashing like lightning. David waited until it quieted, then began. "I've been asked to speak about control," he said. "But control is a myth. What we really manage every day is reaction." The hall hushed instantly. "When a man shredded my check, I didn't lose my value. He just revealed his own. What we do when we're disrespected, that's the truest audit of character there is." He walked slowly across the stage, each word precise. "I didn't respond because I wasn't angry. I responded because anger was too small for what was at stake. Dignity is the only currency that never devalues." People leaned forward in their seats. Ava could feel it, that quiet electricity he always carried. He continued, "Silence isn't the absence of power. It's the pause before it's used correctly. The moment you stop proving your worth to people who can't afford your peace, you've already won." The crowd erupted in applause, but he raised a hand gently, guiding them back to stillness. "Now, we're launching a new initiative, the Mirror Project, to train corporate leaders not to shout louder, but to listen deeper. Because if one viral moment can humble a system, imagine what 1,000 moments of awareness could do." Behind him, the screen shifted. Footage from Meridian Bank, the laughter, the shredder, the silence, then the shift. Text appeared below it. "Change doesn't begin when someone listens to you. It begins when they finally hear themselves." By the time he finished, the entire room was on its feet. The applause this time wasn't noise, it was recognition. As he stepped off stage, reporters shouted questions. Mr. Cole, are you planning to expand the Mirror Project globally? David smiled. We already have. Every person who watched that video, they've already joined. He turned toward Ava, who was trying not to cry. You did good work, he said. So did you, she whispered. You turned humiliation into policy. He laughed softly. No, I just reminded them that silence still has a voice, and today it spoke loud enough for the world to hear. Outside, Geneva's lake reflected 1,000 flashes of camera light, a mirror of calm amidst the noise, and in that reflection, David Cole walked quietly, the man who taught the world to listen. 3 days after Geneva, David was back in Atlanta. The city felt louder than before, but this time, it wasn't noise that bothered him. It was movement, conversations, change. People were actually talking differently. At Cole Capital's headquarters, the lobby display now cycled through clips of the Mirror Project launch. Employees paused between meetings to read the new creed on the wall. Power is not in the voice that shouts, but in the one that decides when not to. Oh. Ava walked beside him, reading new messages pouring into their inbox. Sir, there's another request, she said, from Meridian's downtown branch. They're asking if you'll come back. David looked up. To do what? To speak, she said. To them, in person. They said they want to apologize properly this time. He smiled faintly. Then let's go. The ride downtown was quiet. The same glass tower gleamed against the sky, cleaner somehow, almost humble. The automatic doors slid open, and the entire staff tellers, guards, executives stood waiting. No cameras, no stage, just people. Ava walked a step behind as David entered. The air felt lighter, like guilt had been replaced by understanding. The new manager, a woman in her 40s, stepped forward. Mr. Cole, we wanted to thank you, she said, for not firing everyone that day, for letting us learn instead of leaving us broken. David nodded. Mistakes are tuition. The question is whether you pay attention. He turned toward the counter, the same one where his check had been destroyed. A new machine sat there now, spotless and unused. Behind it, a framed message hung on the wall. Respect issued here daily. The guard who once grabbed his wrist approached hesitantly. Sir, we kept something for you. He handed David a small glass box. Inside, perfectly arranged, were the shredded remains of that infamous check pressed flat, sealed, preserved. David stared at it quietly. You kept it? The guard nodded. To remind us. Ava smiled. Looks like the lesson stayed. He placed the box back on the counter, hands resting beside it. Keep it right here, he said. Let everyone who walks in see it, not as shame, as proof that we changed. The employees nodded. Someone began to clap, but David lifted a hand gently, not to silence, but to steady. Don't clap for me, he said softly. Clap for the version of yourselves that learned to listen. Applause followed anyway, not loud, not rehearsed, just genuine. As they left, Ava turned to him. You know, sir, this started with one act of disrespect. David looked ahead, expression calm, almost reflective. That's how most revolutions start. Someone forgets to recognize dignity, and the world remembers for them. Outside, the afternoon sun glinted off the building's glass. For a moment, it mirrored his reflection not of a man victorious, but of one content. The same hands that had once held a shredded check now held a movement. And in that quiet, Atlanta's skyline seemed to whisper what the world had already learned. Justice doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it walks in silence and everyone hears it. 6 months later, the world had caught up to the silence. Cole Capital's Mirror Project had expanded into 30 cities not just for bankers, but for teachers, officers, managers, and anyone who held power over another person's dignity. The program didn't teach leadership, it taught listening. News anchors called it the Quiet Revolution. But David didn't care for the headlines. He cared for the moments, the quiet ones. One afternoon, he visited a community center on Atlanta's west side, a place where his mother used to bring him as a child. The paint peeled, the floor creaked, but it still smelled like hope. Inside, a group of teenagers sat in a circle, watching a clip projected on the wall. It was the clip the bank manager shredding the check, the laughter, the silence. A young boy asked, "Why didn't he yell?" "I would have yelled." The teacher smiled. Because yelling might have made noise, but silence made change. David stood in the doorway, unseen, listening. The boy frowned. But how did people know he was right? The teacher pointed at the screen. because time proved it louder than words ever could. He left quietly, not wanting to interrupt. Outside, Ava was waiting by the car. "They still show that video everywhere," she said. He smiled faintly. "Good. Let them. It's not about me anymore." They drove downtown, past billboards showing the new slogan, "Respect is the return on investment." Everywhere he looked, he saw reflections of what began as humiliation turned into a blueprint. Ava broke the silence. "Do you ever think about that day?" David looked out the window. "Every morning. Not for the pain, for the reminder. Power isn't something you hold. It's something you handle." They stopped at a red light. Across the street, a janitor stepped out of a Coal Capital branch, holding the door for an elderly woman. The woman thanked him. The man smiled. No cameras. No applause, just decency. David nodded toward the scene. "That's the real dividend." Ava followed his gaze. "Then we're profitable." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "For once, yes." The light turned green. They drove on, the city moving with them, alive with quiet progress. Later that evening, as the skyline glowed gold against the dusk, David stood on the balcony of his office, the same building where it all began. The night breeze carried the hum of distant traffic and a faint echo of applause from somewhere far below. He whispered almost to himself, "We never needed to raise our voices, only our standards." Behind him, on a glass shelf, sat the small framed box of shredded paper, the check that started it all. Its fragments no longer symbolized loss. They symbolized proof that even when torn apart, value remains. The city lights flickered across his reflection. The man who was once mocked in silence now led a world learning to listen. And as the screen faded to black, the voiceover returned steady, cinematic, final. "Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply stands tall and lets the world quiet itself."